The morning air hung crisp over Rechlin Experimental Airfield. March 17, 1943, would mark a turning point in German understanding. Hans Werner Lauscher's fingers trembled as he gripped his pen. The logbook entry he was about to make would challenge everything the Luftwaffe believed about American capabilities. This cannot be possible. No country could build thousands of these machines. Not while fighting across multiple continents, not while supplying allies with weapons and equipment, not while maintaining naval operations in two oceans. Lauscher stared through the cockpit glass of the captured Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress. German forces had designated it DL+XC. Every gauge and switch on the instrument panel contradicted 3 years of intelligence reports. The complexity was staggering. The sophistication was undeniable. 13 defensive gun positions would eventually arm the most advanced versions of this aircraft. But even this F model carried enough firepower to reshape aerial warfare. 9 heavy-caliber machine guns surrounded the bomber. Each weapon could fire 750 rounds per minute. The interlocking fields of fire created something unprecedented in aviation history. German hands now controlled this fortress. The crew had nicknamed it Wolfhound. It represented the first intact American heavy bomber the Luftwaffe would test fly. What Lauscher and his colleagues would discover would prove more damaging to German morale than any battlefield loss. The firepower in this single aircraft multiplied across hundreds of bombers, flying together, created combat capability beyond German comprehension. German industry could never match such production. German tactics had never faced such concentrated defensive fire. The journey from enemy weapon to intelligence treasure had begun months earlier. December 12, 1942 had started as another routine mission. Lieutenant Paul Flickinger piloted B-17F serial number 41-24585. The call sign was PUB. His target was the Rouen-Orterville Railroad Marshalling Yards in occupied France. His aircraft belonged to the 360th Bombardment Squadron. The parent unit was the 303rd Bombardment Group. They operated from RAF Molesworth in Huntingdonshire, England. The bomber carried Wolfhound painted on its nose. American ground crews had applied the unofficial name with care and pride. The 303rd Bomb Group carried the nickname Hell's Angels. Their baptism of fire had come nearly a month earlier, but extensive combat experience was still lacking. Green crews were learning harsh lessons over hostile territory. This December morning brought 20 B-17s to the mission. Their target lay 60 miles east of Paris. Luftwaffe servicing facilities needed destruction. The mission started without complications. Clear skies stretched ahead. Formation integrity looked solid. German fighters had different plans for the American formation. Messerschmitt Bf-109s climbed toward the bombers. Focke-Wulf FW-190s joined the attack. Multiple Luftwaffe units coordinated their assault. The pilots pressed attacks with desperate determination. Breaking up tight defensive formations offered the Germans their best chance. Machine gun fire raked through Wolfhound's fuselage. Cannon shells punched through aluminum skin. Wing structures absorbed devastating impacts. One engine coughed and died. Its propeller windmilled uselessly in the slipstream. Another engine began losing power steadily. Black smoke trailed from damaged cylinders. Oil pressure dropped toward zero. Coolant temperature climbed into the red zone. Flickinger faced an impossible decision. His crippled bomber fell behind the protective formation. The other B-17s continued toward England. They could not slow down without exposing themselves. German fighters swarmed around isolated bombers. Stragglers died quickly when separated from mutual support. Attempting to reach England meant certain death. The English Channel stretched ahead like an impossible barrier. Damaged engines would fail completely. Pursuing fighters would finish the job. The crew would die in the cold waters between France and Britain. Heading for neutral Switzerland involved hundreds of miles. Swedish neutrality lay even further away. Hostile territory stretched in every direction. Failing engines could not maintain altitude. German fighters would pursue relentlessly. Only one option offered any chance of survival: an immediate emergency landing on enemy soil. Flickinger scanned the landscape through breaks in the clouds. Smoke from damaged engines obscured his vision. He spotted what appeared to be suitable terrain near Melun, France. The location lay approximately 60 miles southeast of Paris. Farm fields stretched across rolling countryside. The terrain looked relatively flat. No obvious obstacles threatened an emergency landing. With remarkable skill considering the damage, Flickinger brought 30 tons of bomber down safely. The wheels-up landing occurred in a hayfield. The B-17 slid across grass and mud. Its ball turret guns pointed downward, plowing a long furrow. The aircraft finally came to rest. 10 crew members emerged with hands raised. They expected to become prisoners of war. What they could not anticipate was their aircraft's intelligence value. Within hours, Luftwaffe personnel swarmed over the intact fortress. Engineers photographed every system before damage could occur. Every structural detail received documentation. Every technological feature was recorded. Souvenir hunters and potential saboteurs were kept away. The bomber represented an intelligence windfall beyond previous captures. Most downed Allied aircraft arrived in pieces. Fragments scattered across fields and forests. Secrets lay buried in twisted metal. Critical components were destroyed by impact. But Wolfhound sat nearly intact in French farmland. This was a complete example of American technology ready for exploitation. German recovery specialists recognized the unprecedented prize. This was not scrap metal to be stripped for raw materials. This was the first B-17 flying fortress to fall into German hands in potentially flyable condition. The capture represented an unparalleled opportunity. American heavy bomber design could be studied in detail. Construction methods would reveal industrial philosophy. Defensive armament could be analyzed systematically. Operational capabilities would be tested thoroughly. German technicians worked with urgent efficiency. The damaged bomber needed transport to Leeuwarden Airfield in the Netherlands. The major Luftwaffe base had developed from a pre-war Dutch civil airport. Facilities there could handle the restoration work. Transportation required careful planning and precise execution. Further damage to the valuable prize had to be prevented. 2 days after capture, December 14, 1942, German mechanics completed temporary repairs. Battle damage was patched sufficiently for flight operations. Fuel tanks received German aviation gasoline. American markings disappeared from wings and fuselage. German national insignia replaced enemy identification. Large black crosses adorned the wings prominently. A swastika marked the tail section clearly. The distinctive colors of Nazi Germany announced new ownership. 2 Messerschmitt Bf 110 heavy fighters took escort positions. A hand-picked German crew climbed aboard for the ferry flight. The destination was Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's premier testing facility. The base lay approximately 50 miles north of Berlin in Mecklenburg. Flight plans were distributed to every unit along the route. Luftwaffe fighter bases received explicit instructions. Flak batteries were warned not to engage. The captured fortress was not to be attacked. Recognition signals were established to prevent friendly fire incidents. Despite these precautions and clear German markings, some forces fired on their own prize. Minor additional damage occurred before recognition signals could be confirmed. Attacking units were called off hastily. The incident highlighted German eagerness to destroy American bombers on sight. It also demonstrated coordination difficulties across fractured command structures. The military organization was beginning to feel strain from fighting on multiple fronts. Communication breakdowns were becoming more frequent. When Wolfhound touched down at Rechlin, it entered a world dedicated to understanding enemy technology. The facility served as the central testing location for all Luftwaffe aircraft evaluation. It was Germany's equivalent to Wright Field in Ohio. The British Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough served similar purposes. Every captured Allied airplane that could be repaired eventually arrived here. German engineers dissected foreign technology systematically. They searched for weaknesses to exploit in combat. They looked for innovations to copy or counter. The facility employed hundreds of specialists, technicians, engineers, test pilots, and support personnel worked toward a single mission. Understanding how enemy aircraft worked and how to defeat them consumed all their efforts. For 3 months following its mid-December 1942 arrival, Wolfhound remained grounded. Teams of specialists conducted exhaustive examination. Engineers removed panels to study structural design. The sophisticated stressed skin construction impressed German observers. The B-17s' legendary toughness came from engineering excellence. They measured skin thickness with precision instruments. Alloy composition was analyzed in detail. Rivet patterns were documented carefully. Joining techniques were studied and sketched. Every system received detailed documentation and analysis. The electrical network contained miles of wiring. American approaches to aircraft systems integration were revealed. Hydraulic controls showed sophisticated valve designs. Pressure regulation systems exceeded German capabilities. The oxygen distribution system demonstrated American understanding of high-altitude operations. Combat at extreme altitudes required reliable life support. The intercom system provided clear communication despite engine noise. Crew coordination was essential for effective bombing operations. The fuel management system allowed pilots to shift fuel between tanks. Proper center of gravity had to be maintained throughout the mission. The engine synchronization system reduced pilot workload significantly. Performance was maximized while crew fatigue was minimized. Each component was photographed from multiple angles. Detailed technical drawings captured every dimension. Precision instruments measured critical tolerances. Comparisons were made to equivalent German systems. Luftwaffe aeronautical engineers marveled at American manufacturing philosophy. The bomber demonstrated mass production techniques on unprecedented scales. German industry had never achieved such standardization. German industry had never seriously attempted such volume production. Standardized components meant parts manufactured at different factories fit together perfectly. No custom fitting was required during assembly. Interchangeable parts allowed damaged components to be swapped quickly. Field conditions did not prevent essential repairs. Simplified assembly sequences reduced required skill levels. Semi-skilled labor could build complex aircraft using proper tooling. Everything about the design indicated fundamentally different industrial philosophy. German aircraft required skilled craftsmen for hand-fitting complex components. Labor-intensive processes characterized German production methods. American bombers used standardized modules instead. Semi-skilled workers could install these rapidly. Jigs, templates, and fixtures guided the assembly process. The implications staggered German planners who understood industrial capacity. If one bomber showed this manufacturing sophistication, how many could American industry produce monthly? How many could be completed annually? When German intelligence analysts calculated the numbers, production rates seemed impossible. Yet these conservative estimates would prove accurate. American industrial capacity exceeded German comprehension. On March 17, 1943, Wolfhound finally took to German skies. Its first flight under Luftwaffe control began at Rechlin. Flugzeugführer Lauscher conducted the maiden flight. The experienced test pilot had been selected for his exceptional skill and sound judgment. The bomber handled smoothly despite its massive size. Control inputs received surprising docility in response. American pilots had consistently praised B-17 flight characteristics. German intelligence had intercepted these reports. Prisoner interrogations had confirmed pilot assessments. German test pilots quickly validated these evaluations through direct experience. The Fortress flew with remarkable stability for such a large aircraft. Empty weight was 15 tons. Fully loaded weight reached 30 tons. Yet control responses felt predictable and balanced across the entire flight envelope. Even with engines deliberately shut down, the bomber maintained controllable flight. Single-engine tests proved the aircraft's resilience. Twin-engine operations remained manageable. This capability explained why so many damaged B-17s returned to England. Terrible combat damage that would have doomed German bombers was survivable in American aircraft. Multiple German pilots flew Wolfhound throughout spring 1943. Varied test profiles explored every aspect of performance and handling characteristics. High-altitude evaluation showed comfortable operations above 25,000 feet. German anti-aircraft artillery became progressively less effective at extreme altitudes. Projectile velocity decreased with altitude. Time of flight increased significantly. Engine synchronization tests revealed sophisticated propeller control systems. Constant-speed propellers maintained optimal efficiency. Automated governors reduced pilot workload dramatically. Optimal engine performance was maintained across different flight regimes automatically. Formation flying exercises demonstrated the bomber's exceptional stability. Close proximity to other aircraft posed no handling problems. This explained how Americans maintained tight defensive box formations. Luftwaffe fighters found these formations difficult to penetrate. Concentrated defensive fire made attacks extremely dangerous. The B-17's flight characteristics made it ideal for formation bombing. Dozens of aircraft flew in precise geometric patterns while under fire. But defensive armament tests would prove most significant to German fighter tactics. Understanding the B-17's weapons suite became highest priority. Luftwaffe tactical planners across all Western fighter units needed this information. Every German fighter pilot needed to know fortress blind spots. Approach angles offered the best survival chances. Ranges where German cannons could strike without entering lethal machine gun envelopes were critical intelligence. Tactics that experienced pilots developed through costly trial and error needed documentation. Combat lessons written in blood had to be preserved and shared. The numbers alone sobered German planners who understood implications. The B-17F model carried 9 Browning M2 machine guns. Each weapon was 50 caliber. Positioning provided overlapping fields of fire across nearly every approach angle. Later models would increase armament even further. The B-17G entering service in summer 1943 would carry 13 guns. Chin turrets and improved nose armament would be added. But even 9 heavy machine guns exceeded anything German bombers incorporated defensively. German bombers relied on improvised defensive positions. Gun mounts were often cramped and limited in traverse angles. The Heinkel He-111 was the Luftwaffe's standard medium bomber. It typically carried 6 or 7 machine guns of mixed caliber. Many were rifle-caliber 7.90 mm weapons with limited effectiveness against fighters. The Junkers Ju-88 fast bomber might have 4 or 5 defensive positions scattered around the airframe, but an American B-17F carried 9 heavy machine guns as standard equipment. Every round fired was a .50 caliber projectile. These rounds could penetrate armor plate effectively. Engines could be destroyed from considerable distances. Canopies could be shattered by single hits. Pilots could be killed from ranges exceeding 600 yards. The .50 BMG cartridge delivered 3 times the kinetic energy of German 7.92mm rounds. Energy was comparable to German 13mm heavy machine gun rounds. The difference in defensive firepower was overwhelming. Hans Werner Lauscher became the most experienced test pilot of captured Allied aircraft during the war. He flew Wolfhound extensively during spring and summer 1943. His post-war memoir was published decades later. The title was Luftwaffe Test Pilot, Flying Captured Allied Aircraft of World War II. 2. Detailed accounts of his experiences with the bomber filled many pages. Numerous other Allied aircraft types were also documented. Lauscher approached captured aircraft with scientific curiosity rather than ideological prejudice. Professional attitude made him invaluable to the evaluation program. His engineering background came from university studies. Exceptional natural flying ability developed through years of glider experience. Powered aircraft experience added to his qualifications. He was ideally suited for demanding and dangerous test flying work. He flew over 125 different aircraft types during the war. Not a single serious crash or damage incident occurred. His remarkable safety record testified to technical skill and careful methodology. When Lauscher climbed into Wolfhound's cockpit for his first flight, no resources were available to help him. No instruction manual existed. No training program had been developed. No checklist guided operations. No qualified instructor could provide guidance. He learned through observation and experimentation. Controls and instruments were studied carefully. Educated guesses were made about function and operation. Assumptions were tested carefully at altitude, where mistakes wouldn't prove immediately fatal. The instrument layout differed significantly from German practice. Arrangement and philosophy were completely different. American designers favored centralized panels with standardized gauge positions. Consistency across different aircraft types was maintained. This allowed pilots to transition between aircraft types more easily. Circuit breakers replaced fuses in the electrical system. Resettable protection simplified troubleshooting and maintenance procedures. Hydraulic pressure indicators used different scales. Pounds per square inch replaced kilograms per square centimeter. The throttle quadrant operated with reversed logic compared to German aircraft. Forward motion increased power rather than decreasing it. But perhaps most impressive to Lauscher was the bomber's sheer robustness and damage tolerance. The B-17 absorbed punishment that would have destroyed equivalent German aircraft. It continued flying and fighting after sustaining seemingly unsurvivable damage. Structural strength came from heavy-gauge aluminum alloy frames. Stressed skin construction distributed loads efficiently across the entire airframe. Multiple redundant systems meant single failures rarely proved catastrophic. Mission completion remained possible despite component failures. Self-sealing fuel tanks prevented fires from small-caliber hits. Germans understood this technology, but had never implemented it comprehensively. Armor plate protected critical crew positions and vital systems. Particular attention protected pilots, engines, and fuel systems. Lauscher and other Rechlin test pilots conducted numerous firing tests. Understanding B-17 B-17 defensive capabilities from the attacker's perspective was essential. This viewpoint mattered most to German fighter pilots who would face these bombers in combat. German fighter pilots climbed into Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf Fw-190s. They made simulated attack runs on Wolfhound, while it flew straight and level. Evasive maneuvers were also practiced and documented. Ground observers photographed the engagements carefully. Angles, ranges, closure rates, and exposure times were recorded precisely. Combat cameramen filmed exercises from chase planes. Training footage could be shown to fighter squadrons across Germany and occupied Europe. These exercises revealed uncomfortable truths that contradicted pre-war assumptions. Bomber vulnerability had been overestimated in German tactical doctrine. Attacking from directly behind was the traditional German approach. This method had worked well against earlier Allied bombers with limited defensive armament. But this approach exposed fighter pilots to the most concentrated defensive fire the B-17 could deliver. The tail gunner position was enclosed in a powered Cheyenne turret. Excellent visibility was provided through clear plexiglass panels. A clear field of fire extended directly aft with no blind spots. Coverage included above, below, and to either side within 30 degrees of the tail axis. The dorsal turret was a Sperry design mounting 250 caliber guns. The powered rotating turret could swing rearward to add firepower to defensive barrages. The number of guns engaging rear attackers was doubled. Even waist gunners standing at open windows along the fuselage midsection could engage targets approaching from behind and slightly below or to the sides. A fighter pilot boring in from 6 o'clock faced at least 4 heavy machine guns. Fire was concentrated along a predictable intercept path. The tail gunner alone could bring 2 guns to bear. If he was skilled and range was appropriate, his fire could devastate thin-skinned fighter aircraft. Closing speed between attacking fighter and fleeing bomber typically reached 150 to 200 miles per hour differential. German pilots had perhaps 3 to 5 seconds of firing time. Breaking away was necessary to avoid collision with the massive bomber. During those few seconds, bomber gunners poured hundreds of rounds into the approach corridor. A cone of fire was created that fighters had to penetrate. Luftwaffe combat reports documented deadly effectiveness of this defensive arrangement. Numerous fighters were damaged or destroyed during tail attacks. Fighter pilots who survived attacks on B-17 formations described the experience as flying into a storm of tracers. This visual metaphor captured the psychological impact of facing massed defensive fire. At typical combat ranges of 400 to 800 yards, 1 in every 4 or 5 rounds was a tracer. Visible streams of fire seemed to fill the sky around attacking fighters. These tracers helped gunners adjust their aim by showing bullet trajectory. They also provided immense psychological deterrent to attacking pilots. German pilots saw walls of fire converging on their aircraft from multiple bombers simultaneously. Instinctive reactions caused pilots to break off attacks before reaching optimal firing positions. The devastating psychological warfare waged by these defensive positions cut deep into German fighter pilot morale. Even when actual bullets failed to find their mark, the mere sight of multiple gun barrels tracking their approach broke the nerve of many attackers. High-speed deflection shooting remained brutally difficult. Fighters screaming past at hundreds of miles per hour gave gunners split-second opportunities. Yet the fear paralyzed German pilots before they even entered effective range. Belly attacks seemed promising in theory. Reality proved otherwise. The Sperry ball turret dominated the entire lower sky. This engineering marvel suspended a human being in a transparent sphere beneath the bomber's belly. No blind spots existed in its coverage zone. Inside that cramped metal ball, a gunner folded himself into an impossible position. Knees pressed against his chest. Oxygen mask fogging the optical sight. Two 50 caliber machine guns waited for his command. The computing gun sight calculated lead angles automatically. Physics and mathematics combined to track fast-moving targets across the sky. The ball turret rotated through complete circles, horizontal to nearly vertical. Nothing approached from below without facing those twin barrels. The gunner endured hours in that fetal crouch. No room for a parachute. No space to stretch. No escape if the landing gear failed to lower the turret after landing. Physical torture became the price of defensive supremacy. But that supremacy was absolute. German pilots learned through blood and fire that attacking from beneath meant flying into concentrated crossfire from multiple ball turrets. Every fortress in the formation could bring those guns to bear simultaneously. Each sphere tracked approaching fighters with mechanical precision. Maximum effective range meant immediate engagement. No gradual buildup of defensive fire. The moment German fighters entered range, multiple ball turrets opened fire together. Tracer streams converged on the attacking aircraft from different angles. Waist gunners faced their own brutal conditions. Open windows at 30,000 feet. Hurricane winds screaming through the fuselage. Temperatures far below freezing. Engine noise drowning out all communication attempts. Yet they maintained their positions throughout 8-hour missions. The B-17F positioned these gunners in staggered locations. Port side gunner stood slightly forward. Starboard gunner positioned slightly aft. Each man commanded a 50 caliber machine gun on flexible mountings. Wide traverse angles in both directions. Overlapping fields of fire that eliminated dead zones. Side attacks meant penetrating this crossfire pattern. Both waist positions plus the dorsal turret engaged simultaneously. Multiple guns concentrated on single targets. Hit probability increased dramatically when 3 or 4 guns fired at the same fighter. High-speed slashing attacks became the only viable option. Sustained gun runs were impossible. Too much defensive firepower concentrated in too small a space. German fighters had to dive in fast, fire quick bursts, then break away immediately. Limited time on target reduced accuracy. Rushed attacks wasted precious ammunition. Frontal attacks emerged from desperate tactical analysis. German test programs revealed this approach as the least hopeless option. Head-on passes minimized exposure time to defensive fire. They targeted the bomber's weakest defensive sector. Early B-17 variants mounted minimal forward-firing armament. The Fortress nose contained only 2 or 3 flexible guns. Bombardier and Navigator operated these weapons. Combat wasn't their primary responsibility. Bombing accuracy took precedence over defensive gunnery. These crew members lacked the specialized training that dedicated gunners received. Flexible guns mounted in plexiglass nose sockets had severely limited traverse. Crew members physically moved weapons between positions. The transparent nose provided excellent visibility for bombing runs. The Norden bomb sight demanded unobstructed forward vision, but defensive capability suffered from these design priorities. Plexiglass offered minimal protection for crew members. Limited defensive firepower could engage frontal attackers. Skilled German pilots with steady nerves could exploit this vulnerability. Diving attacks from 12 o'clock high became standard doctrine. Fire concentrated bursts at the cockpit area. Break away beneath the bomber before defensive guns could track effectively. Hauptmann Egon Meyer of Jagdgeschwader, Strategists, pioneered these tactics in late 1942, just months before Wolfhound's capture. Combat experience and careful analysis revealed the defensive firepower distribution. Most guns faced rearward or sideways. The nose remained relatively vulnerable to direct assault. Frontal attacks created combined closing speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour. German fighters approached at 350 to 400 miles per hour. American bombers flew toward them at 150 to 180 miles per hour. Simple mathematics created terrifying physics. Relative closure rates gave nose gunners perhaps 2 seconds of engagement opportunity, 2 seconds to acquire the target, calculate lead angles, fire accurately despite wind blast and vibration, all while watching a fighter dive directly toward them with guns blazing. Psychological pressure broke many defensive gunners before they could fire effectively. Attacking pilots enjoyed nearly stationary targets growing larger in their gun sights. Aim calculation became relatively simple compared to deflection shots. The bomber filled the entire windscreen at close range. Point-blank shooting eliminated most variables that complicated aerial gunnery. When executed properly by skilled pilots, head-on passes achieved spectacular results. Some German aces downed multiple bombers in single missions using these tactics. But the technique demanded exceptional nerve and rigid discipline. Not every pilot possessed the psychological strength required. Fighter and bomber hurtled toward each other at combined speeds that defied human comprehension. 750 feet per second closure rates. The distance between aircraft shrank with terrifying speed. Attacking pilots had to hold course directly into the bomber's nose. The target grew from distant speck to massive 4-engine aircraft in seconds. Windscreens filled completely with approaching bombers. Pilots waited until point-blank range before firing. 200 yards or less for maximum effectiveness. Any hesitation wasted the limited ammunition that German fighters carried. Early breakaways prompted by survival instinct reduced attack effectiveness dramatically. Precious cannon shells and machine gun bullets missed their targets. The psychological pressure proved unbearable for many pilots. Watching a 4-engine bomber grow larger while tracer fire flashed past, the canopy broke their concentration. They pulled away too early, wasted their attack approach, exposed themselves to top turret fire during the breakaway. Even successful frontal attacks often proved fatal for German pilots despite destroying their targets. Combined closing speeds created constant collision dangers. Precise timing and spatial judgment became matters of life and death. Pilots who pressed attacks too aggressively sometimes forgot to break away in time. Fixation on targets clouded judgment. Multiple Luftwaffe fighters collided with B-17s during frontal passes. Both crews died instantly in violent impacts. The massive bomber could absorb tremendous damage and continue flying. Rugged construction gave the B-17 its legendary reputation for toughness. Unless cannon shells struck the cockpit directly, killing both pilots, or disabled multiple engines simultaneously, the fortress often continued toward its target. Serious damage to forward sections didn't guarantee kills. German fighter pilots needed complete destruction. Quick and decisive kills. Wounded B-17s kept flying and fighting. Many limped home to England, where American repair facilities rebuilt them for future missions. Damaged bombers that returned to base represented failed interceptions despite the risks taken. These test flights at Rechlin, combined with combat reports from frontline units, created comprehensive intelligence. Understanding of B-17 capabilities circulated throughout the Luftwaffe. Tactical bulletins, training films, and intelligence reports spread the knowledge. But understanding brought little comfort to German planners. Knowing the enemy's strength didn't eliminate it. Americans kept building fortresses faster than the Luftwaffe could shoot them down. Production rates that seemed impossible were confirmed through multiple intelligence sources. The strategic implications haunted German military leadership. Between May and early June 1943, Wolfhound underwent intensive testing in Department E3. Otto Kuno directed these evaluation programs personally. Engine performance measurements at various altitudes, supercharger efficiency analysis at different power settings, fuel consumption charts under diverse operating conditions. Wright Cyclone R1820 radial engines powered the Fortress. Each engine produced 1,200 horsepower at rated altitude. 4 engines mounted in nacelles, suspended below and ahead of the wings. Total available power reached 4,800 horsepower. This massive power drove the 30-ton aircraft to speeds approaching 300 miles per hour at altitude, operating ceilings above 35,000 feet. Air density at those heights became too thin for effective German fighter operations. Standard fighters lacked specialized high-altitude equipment. German intelligence analysts calculated Boeing production rates with growing alarm. The company and its subcontractors manufactured these complex aircraft faster than German heavy bomber production. Ratios of 5 to 10 times German output. Numbers that defied belief yet were confirmed repeatedly. American industry simultaneously built fighters, tanks, ships, and transport aircraft for global operations. What hope did Germany have of matching such industrial capacity? Modern warfare had become an industrial contest as much as a military one. The question haunted planners who understood the implications. June 12, 1943, brought Wolfhound to an exhibition at Lörz Airfield. Luftwaffe commanders and technical specialists gathered to examine captured Allied aircraft. The display served multiple training and intelligence purposes. Aircraft recognition training to prevent friendly fire incidents. Alongside the captured B-17 sat examples of other Allied types. A B-24 Liberator heavy bomber showed different American design approaches to long-range bombing missions. A P-47 Thunderbolt fighter demonstrated American philosophy emphasizing ruggedness and firepower over agility and maneuverability. A P-51 Mustang revealed the growing threat posed by long-range escort fighters. Soon, these would accompany bomber formations deep into German territory. A P-38 Lightning twin-engine fighter showed unconventional American design thinking. An Avro Lancaster represented British heavy bombing capabilities from a different perspective. A de Havilland Mosquito demonstrated the fast bomber concept that relied on speed rather than defensive armament. A Hawker Typhoon showed British ground attack capabilities. Various Spitfire variants illustrated British fighter evolution through multiple design iterations. The exhibition familiarized German personnel with enemy aircraft appearance and markings. It demonstrated captured technology that German engineers might adapt or counter. Most soberly, it provided evidence of Allied industrial capacity and technical sophistication that was outpacing German development. Luftwaffe officers left the exhibition deeply troubled by what they observed. One participant wrote later about the contrast between German and American manufacturing quality. Even casual observers could see the differences immediately. American aircraft components fit together with precision tolerances. German craftsmen admired the manufacturing quality they witnessed. Matching construction standards across thousands of aircraft indicated sophisticated quality control systems. Smooth finishes reflected attention to aerodynamic details. Careful assembly showed systematic production methods rather than improvised solutions. German aircraft produced increasingly, with slave labor under constant Allied bombing, showed the contrast starkly. Supply chains disrupted repeatedly. Tooling destroyed by air raids. Rough workmanship became standard. Mismatched panels required hand-fitting in the field. Improvised repairs used non-standard materials. The implications were unmistakable even to officers with limited technical knowledge. German industry struggled to maintain production of increasingly obsolescent designs. American factories turned out superior equipment in overwhelming quantities. The industrial war was being lost decisively. After its appearance at the Lurz exhibition, Wolfhound returned to Rechlin for final testing. July 1943 brought new experiments with glider towing apparatus. Engineers evaluated the bomber's suitability for transport operations beyond its primary bombing role. The DFS-230 combat glider program required powerful tow aircraft. Loaded gliders needed hauling to operational altitude. The B-17's 4 engines provided ample power for this demanding mission profile. Test flights between June 16 and early August evaluated comprehensive towing procedures. Release mechanisms underwent thorough testing. Formation flying with gliders in trail required precise coordination. The tests proved successful from technical standpoints. They demonstrated the B-17's versatility beyond bombing missions. Suitability for transport roles was confirmed through systematic evaluation. Germany's glider forces were declining after catastrophic losses. Crete operations cost student paratroopers 50% casualties. Other theaters proved airborne operations were prohibitively expensive. Practical applications for these towing tests remained limited by broader strategic circumstances. Germany lacked the transport aircraft fleet needed for major airborne operations in 1943. Fuel reserves were insufficient for large-scale glider missions. The experimental work continued, but operational applications remained theoretical rather than practical. September 1943 brought Wolfhound's transfer from test facilities to operational service. Kampfgeschwader 200 operated from Rangsdorf Airfield near Berlin. This special operations wing differed from any other unit in the German Air Force. Secrecy surrounded all its activities. KG-200's mission portfolio included long-range reconnaissance flights deep into enemy territory. Aircraft that could blend with enemy formations provided unique advantages. Insertion and extraction of intelligence agents behind Allied lines required specialized capabilities. Supply drops to German forces in partisan-controlled areas demanded long-range precision. Testing of experimental aircraft and weapons too sensitive for standard evaluation units fell under KG-200's purview. The unit operated an eclectic collection of German and captured Allied aircraft. Mission requirements determined aircraft selection rather than standardized logistics. Alongside German types like the Junkers Ju-290 long-range transport, the unit flew diverse captured machines. Heinkel Forney U-111 medium bombers provided tactical flexibility. Arado R-232 transports handled specialized cargo missions. Captured Soviet aircraft served operations on the Eastern Front. Multiple American bombers flew operations in the West and Mediterranean theaters. The B-17's long range exceeded 2,000 miles. High-altitude capability, above 25,000 feet, provided operational flexibility. Rugged construction survived damage and harsh operating conditions. Flying captured American bombers deep into Allied territory offered unique advantages. The logistical burden of maintaining non-standard aircraft was justified by operational benefits. At night or in poor visibility, Allied radar operators might mistake German crewed fortresses for friendly bombers returning from missions. The deception could buy precious minutes or hours before defenses reacted. Time often meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Even in daylight, a B-17 flying at high altitude might join American formations temporarily. Intelligence gathering on tactics, formations, and radio procedures became possible. At Rangsdorf, Wolfhound received new camouflage designed for night operations over Allied territory. Dark blues and grays replaced earlier test schemes. Yellow undersurfaces and mottled greens gave way to operational colors. KG-200 side codes beginning with A3+ were applied to both fuselage sides. Aircraft identification for German forces was maintained while preserving operational security about specific unit assignments. Records indicate the bomber eventually carried the code A3P-PLOE. Some sources suggest multiple codes during service, depending on mission requirements. Documentation practices varied with operational security needs. Detailed records of Wolfhound's operational service with KG-200 have been lost to history. Archives were destroyed during the war's final months. Others were dispersed across multiple locations. Some participants concealed information into the post-war era, when operations remained classified for decades. The secretive nature of special operations work meant many missions were never formally documented. Post-war research by aviation historians established that KG-200 operated at least 4 captured B-17s between late 1943 and mid-1944. Some sources suggest higher numbers during peak operational periods. These bombers flew missions across Europe, the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and North Africa. Operating in the war's most sensitive theaters required exceptional security measures. Some missions involved straightforward transport of critical personnel or equipment to isolated German garrisons. Others inserted intelligence agents into Allied-controlled territory using parachute drops at night. High-altitude bailouts allowed agents to land far from the drop aircraft's apparent course. Several missions conducted reconnaissance of Allied installations and photographed ports where invasion forces might assemble. Airfields where bomber forces concentrated became priority targets for photographic intelligence. Supply concentrations that might indicate future Allied operations required careful documentation. The most sensitive operations remain shrouded in secrecy decades after the war's conclusion. Details are known only to participants who have since passed away. Hans Werner Lersche flew other captured B-17s that made their way to Rechlin after Wolfhound's transfer to operational service. October 9, 1943, brought another intact fortress into German hands. B-17F, serial number 42-30336, named Miss Nonnally II by its American crew, crash-landed in a field at Norholm Estate near Varde in Denmark. Engine trouble during a mission over Germany forced the emergency landing. The crew bailed out over Denmark successfully. The pilot brought the aircraft down intact through skilled emergency procedures. Controlled crash landings demonstrated the B-17's docile handling characteristics even in emergencies. German recovery teams arrived quickly, understanding the intelligence value of captured American bombers. Lersche flew the bomber out of the farm field to Esbjerg Airfield, then on to Rechlin for evaluation. Flying an unfamiliar American bomber with no instruction manual, no checkout flight, and no ground training demonstrated exceptional pilot skill. The B-17's forgiving handling characteristics made such feats possible. Miss Nonnally II received the German code 7+8 and served in evaluation roles. Records indicate it was still flying test missions in December 1944. Each newly captured fortress provided fresh examination opportunities for German engineers and intelligence specialists. Different production blocks were compared systematically. Engineers looked for evolutionary changes that might indicate vulnerabilities to exploit. New German countermeasures were developed based on observed improvements. Various ammunition types were tested against B-17 structure to determine optimal attack profiles. Fighter pilot tactics were refined based on structural analysis. Different German cannon calibers were evaluated against American armor and self-sealing fuel tanks. 20mm cannons proved marginally effective against fortress construction. 30mm cannons delivered devastating results when hits were achieved. Comprehensive pictures emerged from these exhaustive test programs. The B-17 represented the peak of American bomber development in 1943. Defensive firepower levels had fundamentally altered daylight strategic bombing calculations. German tactical doctrine required complete revision. Statistics calculated by German test pilots at Rechlin revealed sobering realities. A single B-17G, the final and most heavily armed variant entering service in summer 1943, carried 13 Browning M2 machine guns. 50 caliber weapons provided complete defensive coverage. These weapons fired standard ammunition at 750 to 800 rounds per minute. Each gun maintained sustained fire for several minutes at a time. Ammunition capacity and barrel heat buildup limited continuous firing. Gunner management of these factors became critical for defensive effectiveness. Typical ammunition loads for B-17G aircraft totaled approximately 7,500 rounds. Distribution across all gun positions followed carefully calculated schemes. Defensive coverage was balanced against weight considerations. Each gun position carried hundreds of rounds for defensive engagements during long missions over Europe. The tail turret alone carried 500 rounds per gun for 1,000 rounds total. Sufficient ammunition for sustained engagement of pursuing fighters. Multiple attacks could be repelled with careful ammunition management. Gunner discipline in target selection became crucial for defensive success. The upper turret position stored impressive ammunition quantities. This allowed gunners to keep firing for extended periods during combat. Each gun had access to hundreds of rounds. The rotating mechanism could traverse smoothly in all directions. Gunners could engage multiple targets without running dry. The ball turret presented unique challenges for ammunition storage. The cramped spherical compartment severely limited space. Every inch counted in that tiny metal sphere. Despite these constraints, engineers managed impressive capacity. Between 250 and 500 rounds per gun fit inside. Mission requirements determined the exact load. The gunner's physical size also affected capacity. Larger men meant less room for ammunition. Smaller gunners allowed maximum loads. Waist positions carried substantial firepower reserves. Each flexible gun mount held between 600 and 800 rounds. These positions covered the bomber's vulnerable flanks. Gunners could traverse their weapons across wide arcs. The ammunition fed smoothly through flexible chutes. Metal links clinked softly as rounds moved forward. Brass cases ejected into collection bags. The steady rhythm of feeding mechanisms never stopped. Nose positions required careful ammunition planning. Early model bombers relied on cheek guns. Later variants added the distinctive chin turret. Each position needed adequate supplies for entire missions. Ammunition boxes filled every available space. The navigator and bombardier shared cramped quarters with thousands of rounds. Heavy metal containers lined the compartment walls. German test pilots at Rechlin performed detailed calculations. They wanted to understand the fortress's true firepower. The numbers they discovered proved staggering. These calculations explained bomber crew confidence levels. A single B-17G model carried 13 separate guns. Each weapon fired 750 rounds per minute at maximum rate. Simple mathematics revealed devastating potential. All guns firing simultaneously produced incredible results. The combined rate approached 10,000 rounds per minute. This figure covered all defensive positions together. German pilots had never faced such concentrated firepower. The psychological impact was as important as actual damage. Attacking fighters flew into walls of lead. Tracers streaked past cockpit windows like deadly fireworks. Breaking down these numbers into seconds made the threat clearer. A fully engaged fortress threw approximately 160 heavy bullets into surrounding airspace every second. These weren't small-caliber rounds either. Each projectile weighed nearly 2 ounces. Impact energy could shatter aircraft structures instantly. The math painted a terrifying picture for attacking pilots, but American bombers never ventured alone over hostile territory. Isolation meant certain destruction against determined opposition. The entire strategic bombing concept relied on mutual support. Multiple aircraft provided overlapping defensive zones. This multiplied the firepower any single attacker would encounter. American daylight bombing doctrine evolved through pre-war planning. Painful combat experience in 1942 refined the concepts. The bloody lessons of 1943 perfected formation tactics. Massed formations became the cornerstone of survival. Each bomber's guns supported neighboring aircraft. Overlapping fields of fire created defensive umbrellas. Attacking fighters faced concentrated fire from multiple sources. Colonel Curtis LeMay developed the combat box formation. His tactical genius saved countless American lives. The formation positioned bombers in tight three-dimensional patterns. Each aircraft could support its neighbors with defensive fire. Vertical stacking maximized mutual coverage. Horizontal spacing prevented collision during evasive maneuvers. A basic squadron element contained 3 aircraft flying close formation. The lead bomber set course and speed. Wingmen maintained precise positions regardless of conditions. Combat formations demanded extraordinary flying skill. Pilots fought fatigue, weather, and enemy action simultaneously. Turbulence from nearby engines created constant buffeting. Prop wash threatened to tear formations apart. 3 squadron elements stacked vertically formed complete squadron boxes. 9 bombers flew in carefully calculated positions. Each aircraft's guns covered specific defensive sectors. The formation resembled a 3-dimensional puzzle. Every piece had to fit perfectly for maximum effectiveness. Gaps in formation meant gaps in defensive coverage. 3 squadron boxes combined into group formations. These contained 27 aircraft in standard configuration. Some groups flew 4 squadrons for 36 total bombers. Actual numbers varied with mission requirements and maintenance status. Battle damage reduced available aircraft. Mechanical problems grounded others before takeoff. A typical 3-squadron group fielded 18 to 27 aircraft. Even conservative estimates showed impressive firepower totals. Each bomber might carry 9 guns instead of 13. This accounted for mixed F and G model aircraft. The group's combined armament exceeded 180 heavy machine guns. Interlocking fire patterns created deadly zones around the formation. 3 such groups formed complete wing formations. These massive aerial armadas contained 54 to 81 bombers. Combined defensive armament reached 500 to 700 machine guns. Interlocking fire zones stretched for miles around the formation. Attacking fighters faced concentrated fire from dozens of bombers simultaneously. The visual impact overwhelmed many pilots before they reached effective range. German fighter pilots described approaching these formations in vivid terms. They compared the experience to flying toward walls of fire. Tracers filled the sky like deadly spiderwebs. The psychological pressure was enormous even before actual combat began. Many pilots broke off attacks prematurely rather than face the defensive barrage. At typical combat engagement ranges of 400 to 800 yards, every bomber gunner opened fire simultaneously when they detected attacking fighters. The visual spectacle was both beautiful and terrifying to witness. 50 or more machine guns might concentrate on a single fighter, making head-on passes through the formation. Each bomber's gunners tracked targets independently, while firing at maximum rates. The psychological impact often overwhelmed pilot training and experience. Many aviators simply couldn't force themselves to fly deeper into defensive barrages. Their survival instincts overrode tactical discipline. They broke off attacks before reaching optimal firing positions. This protected individual pilots, but reduced attack effectiveness significantly. Luftwaffe after-action reports documented these psychological failures repeatedly. Experienced squadron leaders noted attacks broken off prematurely. Pilots returned to base with full ammunition loads. They reported defensive fire too intense for successful approaches. Squadron commanders struggled to maintain attack discipline under such conditions. Those pilots who maintained formation discipline faced brutal mathematical realities. Pressing attacks home despite defensive fire required exceptional courage. The arithmetic heavily favored defending bombers over attacking fighters. Luftwaffe combat analysis units studied actual engagement data extensively. Their findings painted a sobering picture for German fighter forces. Rear attacks on B-17 bombers required an average of 20 hits from 20mm cannon shells for destruction. This figure assumed hits were distributed across vulnerable systems rather than concentrated in single areas. The fortress's rugged construction absorbed tremendous punishment before succumbing. Redundant control systems kept damaged bombers flying. Self-sealing fuel tanks prevented catastrophic fires from minor hits. Average pilot accuracy against evasive targets at combat ranges ran approximately 2%. This figure came from extensive analysis of gun camera footage. Ammunition expenditure reports confirmed the low hit rates. Deflection shooting at high speeds proved extremely difficult. Range estimation errors reduced accuracy further. Brief engagement windows limited firing opportunities. Therefore, destroying a single fortress from behind required firing approximately 1,000 rounds of 20mm ammunition. This calculation assumed average pilot skills and typical combat conditions. Exceptional pilots might achieve better results. Novice aviators needed even more ammunition for successful kills. The mathematics were unforgiving for attacking fighters. Early model Focke-Wulf FW-190 fighters carried only 500 total rounds of 20mm ammunition. Two cannons held 250 rounds each in drum magazines. Upgrading to 4 cannons with belt-fed systems provided 500 to 600 total rounds. This remained insufficient for multiple sustained attack runs. Pilots had ammunition for perhaps 1 or 2 gun passes before running empty. Even with upgraded armament packages, German fighters faced severe limitations. A single pilot might have enough ammunition for 2 sustained attacks. After that, he was Winchester and forced to break off. The long flight back to base for rearming took hours. Meanwhile, bomber formations continued their missions. Their thousands of rounds allowed prolonged defensive engagement throughout entire operations. Individual bomber gunners achieved relatively low hit percentages. Deflection shooting at extreme ranges proved extremely challenging. High closure speeds complicated aiming solutions further. Brief engagement windows limited firing opportunities significantly. But the sheer volume of defensive fire made hits statistically inevitable when dozens of bombers engaged single targets simultaneously. Luftwaffe fighter losses climbed steadily through 1943. American bomber streams grew larger and more frequent. German fighter forces struggled to regenerate losses faster than combat attrition destroyed them. Training accidents added to operational losses. New pilot production couldn't match experienced aviator casualties. Frontal attacks offered better kill ratios for skilled pilots. These required extraordinary skill and courage that not all aviators possessed. Approaching head-on meant fighters closed at combined speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour. Both aircraft moved toward each other at maximum velocity. Collision became a constant threat throughout the engagement. At that closure rate, target pictures changed dramatically every second. Pilots needed constant attention and rapid decision-making abilities. Range estimation became critical for attack success. Opening fire too early meant rounds dissipated without effect. Waiting too long made collision unavoidable. The margin for error was razor-thin. The optimal firing envelope lasted perhaps 2 seconds from 400 yards to 100 yards. This brief window required precise timing and exceptional reflexes. During those critical seconds, fighter pilots needed to accomplish multiple tasks simultaneously. They had to aim carefully while compensating for their aircraft's motion. Bomber evasive maneuvers complicated aiming solutions further. Pilots fired multiple bursts while correcting aim between shots. They initiated breakaway maneuvers before aircraft collided. This demanded constant practice under realistic conditions. Only experienced pilots developed the exceptional reflexes required. Training programs struggled to produce such skilled aviators quickly enough. The captured B-17 at Rechlin provided German fighter pilots with unprecedented study opportunities. They could examine their target intimately, in ways impossible through combat experience alone. Walking completely around the fortress revealed gun positions and firing arcs. Every angle showed different vulnerabilities and defensive capabilities. Climbing inside through waist windows gave pilots first-hand experience of cramped interior conditions. They crawled through narrow passages connecting gun positions. The limited space and difficult working conditions that bomber gunners endured became clear. Physical demands on defensive crews were enormous during long missions. Sitting in various gun positions provided valuable tactical intelligence. Pilots tested traverse and elevation limits on different weapons. They noted blind spots where attacking fighters might evade defensive fire. Specific approach angles offered protection from certain gun positions. This knowledge proved invaluable for planning attack runs. Flying formation exercises with the captured bomber created realistic training scenarios. The fortress took evasive action while fighters practiced approach angles. Pilots developed firing solutions under controlled conditions. These exercises transferred directly to combat situations. Training proved invaluable for experienced pilots who learned to exploit vulnerabilities through systematic study. But by late 1943, the Luftwaffe was losing experienced pilots faster than training programs could replace them. New aviators, straight from flight school, lacked hundreds of hours of combat experience. They couldn't execute complex attack maneuvers under fire while maintaining situational awareness. Inexperience led to tactical errors with fatal consequences. New pilots often broke off attacks prematurely rather than risk collision. Others pressed attacks too aggressively and died in collisions. Ammunition was wasted on impossible shots from excessive ranges. Tactical discipline broke down under combat stress. Squadron leaders watched promising young pilots die from inexperience rather than enemy action. The Americans continuously improved their bombers based on combat experience. Crew feedback drove design modifications between production batches. The B-17G model entered service in late summer 1943. This variant added the distinctive chin turret under the nose section. Two 50-caliber machine guns mounted in the remotely operated turret. The bombardier controlled the chin turret through a computing gun sight. This significantly improved frontal defensive capability against head-on attacks. The preferred tactic of German aces suddenly became far more dangerous. Attacking pilots faced concentrated fire throughout their approach runs. The tactical balance shifted in favor of defending bombers. The chin turret could track attacking fighters from first detection at long range. Fire concentrated along predicted intercept paths before fighters reached effective range. Combined with existing cheek guns operated by Bombardier and Navigator, plus the top turret swinging forward, a B-17G could bring 6 to 8 heavy machine guns to bear on frontal attackers. This defensive cone required exceptional skill to penetrate successfully. German pilots had to adapt tactics once again. They searched for new solutions to evolving defensive problems. Some began attacking from high angles above and ahead. Steep diving attacks exploited limited gun elevation due to mechanical constraints. Others approached from below the nose section. They hoped to stay under chin turret depression limits while avoiding ball turret coverage. Still others resorted to standoff weapons launched from beyond machine gun effective range. Unguided rockets offered hope for lucky hits on tightly packed formations. The Werfer Granit 21-centimeter rocket became favored among German fighter units. Tubular launchers mounted under wing surfaces carried single rounds. These unguided projectiles carried large, high-explosive warheads. The concept was breaking up bomber formations through blast effects rather than achieving direct hits. Actual hit probability remained low due to poor ballistic characteristics, but rockets exploding amid combat boxes could damage multiple bombers simultaneously. Blast effects and fragmentation threatened nearby aircraft. Violent evasive maneuvers caused collisions between formation members. The psychological impact was enormous, even without direct hits. But standoff attacks carried serious problems that limited overall effectiveness. Rockets were inaccurate beyond 800 yards maximum range. They were heavy enough to significantly reduce fighter performance characteristics. Substantial drag made launching aircraft vulnerable to Allied escort fighters. The tactical advantages came with severe penalties. Pilots carrying underwing rocket tubes became easy targets for escort fighters. American P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts included long-range variants by 1944. These could accompany bomber formations all the way to Berlin and back. They eliminated the sanctuary German fighters had previously enjoyed in German airspace depths. The technological race continued throughout 1943 and 1944 as both sides sought advantages. The Luftwaffe developed heavier cannons including 30mm Mk108 weapons. These could destroy bombers with just a few hits. Larger rockets with improved guidance systems were tested. Experiments included aerial bombing where fighters dropped small bombs onto bomber formations from above. The Americans improved defensive armament with G-model variants. Formation tactics were perfected through painful combat experience. Better escort fighters with longer range and improved performance entered service. Each side responded to opponent innovations with countermeasures and new technologies. But one inescapable reality dominated this technological equation. No amount of tactical innovation could change fundamental production capabilities. American industry could replace losses faster than German industry despite operating across the Atlantic Ocean. Every component had to be shipped to European combat zones. Every B-17 shot down over Europe represented tactical victory for successful German pilots. But strategic victory only occurred if future missions were prevented. Within weeks, sometimes mere days, another brand-new fortress would replace the lost bomber. Fresh aircraft arrived from Boeing production lines in Seattle regularly. Douglas plants in Long Beach contributed steady streams. Vega facilities in Burbank added their production totals. Fresh crews accompanied new aircraft, ready to continue bombing campaigns. The replacement cycle seemed endless to German intelligence analysts. They understood the implications but could do nothing to counter American industrial advantages. Production statistics told stories of overwhelming material superiority that couldn't be matched. Boeing, Douglas, and Vega built 12,631 B-17 bombers between 1935 and 1945. The overwhelming majority were produced during peak war years of 1943 and 1944. Boeing's Seattle plant alone constructed 6,181 B-17s across all variants. Douglas contributed 3,000 aircraft from Long Beach, California facilities. Vega, a Lockheed subsidiary, added 2,650 from Burbank, California plants. Peak production in 1944 saw Boeing alone building approximately 362 B-17 bombers monthly. This exceeded 12 aircraft per day from a single manufacturing facility. The rate seemed impossible to German observers, but was verified through multiple intelligence sources. Aerial reconnaissance confirmed massive factory complexes. Agent reports detailed production line operations. German four-engine bomber production never approached these figures. This failure was particularly galling given Germany's more advanced aviation industry at war's beginning. The Heinkel He-177 was Germany's only operational four-engine heavy bomber. Years of development resulted in chronic problems that limited operational effectiveness. Engine fires plagued the unusual coupled engine design throughout its service life. Mechanical problems kept availability rates extremely low. Total production across all variants barely exceeded 100 aircraft between 1942 and 1944. Operational availability remained so poor that many units refused to accept the type. They preferred twin-engine medium bombers despite inferior range and bomb load capabilities. Germany simply couldn't match American heavy bomber production in quantity or quality. This failure was rooted in strategic decisions made years before the war began. Industrial organization prioritized quality over quantity in traditional German fashion. Resource limitations became apparent as the war expanded globally. When Luftwaffe pilots learned production statistics through intelligence briefings, morale suffered among thoughtful aviators who understood the implications. These briefings attempted to prepare them for opposition scale they would face. The numbers were sobering for anyone who could do basic mathematics. What was the point of risking lives to shoot down one fortress when 10 more would replace it within a week? This question haunted fighter squadrons across Germany as strategic situations deteriorated through 1944. Individual heroics couldn't overcome industrial mathematics. Tactical victories became meaningless without strategic impact. The captured B-17 at Rechlin provided German engineers with detailed understanding of American manufacturing methods. They studied modular construction, allowing sub-assemblies built at different factories to fit together perfectly during final assembly. Minimal hand-fitting was required between major components. This streamlined production dramatically. Standardized components were sourced from hundreds of subcontractors nationwide. This created supply chains of unprecedented complexity and efficiency. Raw materials flowed from mines and farms across America. Processing plants refined materials to exact specifications. Component manufacturers produced standardized parts by the millions. Assembly sequences were simplified to allow semi-skilled workers to build complex bombers quickly. Many workers were women entering industrial employment for the first time. They achieved production rates that experienced German craftsmen couldn't match using traditional methods. The contrast was stark and undeniable. German reports from these studies expressed grudging admiration for American industrial organization. They also noted the impossibility of Germany matching such methods within existing systems. Cultural preferences for craftsmanship over mass production ran too deep. Industrial infrastructure was organized differently from the beginning. The B-17 represented more than individual engineering excellence or clever design solutions. It embodied a complete manufacturing philosophy, prioritizing production volume over artisanal quality. Interchangeable parts were emphasized over custom fitting throughout the design. Adequate quality was accepted over traditional perfection standards. Every design decision reflected this mass production philosophy. Standardized fasteners throughout the aircraft reduced inventory requirements significantly. Assembly operations were simplified through consistent hardware. Straight panels with minimal compound curves simplified forming operations and reduced scrap rates substantially. Modular subassemblies allowed parallel construction of fuselage sections, wings, and tail surfaces. These came together in final assembly, with minimal fitting required. Production time was reduced dramatically compared to traditional methods. Quality control focused on function rather than finish appearance. This approach enabled Boeing's Seattle plant to complete one B-17 every hour at peak production rates. The feat seemed impossible to German observers accustomed to production rates measured in weeks per aircraft. Cultural differences in manufacturing philosophy were as important as technical capabilities. German factories still used traditional aircraft construction methods with custom-fitted components. Hand-riveted assemblies required skilled craftsmen performing most operations. Weeks were needed to build single bombers to traditional quality standards. The approach worked for small production runs, but couldn't scale to American levels. The implications were strategic and inescapable to anyone understanding industrial production realities. Even if German fighters achieved favorable loss ratios in combat, even if they shot down 2 or 3 bombers for every fighter lost, American industry could sustain such attrition indefinitely. German industry could not match this capability. By mid-1944, this reality became undeniable even to the most optimistic German commanders. The question was no longer whether Germany could win the air war over Europe. Strategic victory had become impossible given production disparities. The question became how long German forces could continue fighting against increasingly overwhelming material disadvantages. Collapse was inevitable unless fundamental conditions changed dramatically. No tactical innovations could overcome strategic production imbalances. Individual pilot skill and aircraft performance advantages were meaningless against such odds. The mathematics were too clear for self-deception. The captured B-17s at Rechlin had taught the Luftwaffe everything they needed to know about the Flying Fortress as a weapon system. They understood its strengths, including rugged construction and heavy defensive armament, thoroughly. Weaknesses were documented, including vulnerable nose sections on early models and blind spots in gun coverage. Capabilities were measured in terms of range, altitude, bomb load, and formation flying characteristics. Limitations were noted, including requirements for formation integrity and vulnerability to determined frontal attacks by skilled pilots. Tactics were developed that could destroy bombers despite defensive firepower when executed properly. But this knowledge couldn't change fundamental arithmetic of industrial production determining strategic outcomes. Technical understanding was insufficient without matching production capabilities. The gap was too large to bridge through superior tactics or individual heroics alone. For every German pilot who learned to attack B-17s effectively through Rechlin training or combat experience, the Americans trained 10 new bomber crews. Training pipelines in the United States processed thousands of aviators monthly. Flight schools graduated navigators, bombardiers, and gunners in steady streams. For every fortress shot down over Germany through superior tactics, American factories built 5 more bombers. The replacement rate exceeded loss rates by comfortable margins. Operational strength actually increased, despite combat losses. The trend was unsustainable for German forces. For every successful interception disrupting bombing raids, a dozen more raids flew the next week with larger formations. Mission frequency increased as more aircraft became available. Target lists grew longer as production increased. the strategic initiative belonged entirely to American forces. The defensive firepower that impressed German test pilots represented only one aspect of comprehensive systems designed to project strategic bombing capability deep into enemy territory despite determined opposition. Range, altitude, bomb load, construction, and armament combined into single packages that, when multiplied across hundreds of aircraft flying mutually supporting formations, created aerial weapons that fundamentally changed warfare's nature. Luftwaffe General Adolf Galland, one of Germany's most successful fighter aces, with 104 confirmed victories and eventual commander of German fighter forces, wrote extensively in post-war years about defending against American daylight bombing challenges. He acknowledged that individual German pilots often possessed superior training and more extensive combat experience compared to American bomber crews. Many American aviators were on their first combat tours when they encountered veteran German pilots with years of experience. Training quality in German flight schools had traditionally emphasized individual excellence over mass production of adequate pilots. Cultural values influenced military training just as they affected industrial production. German fighters, particularly late-war models like the Focke-Wulf FW-190D9 long-nosed variant and Messerschmitt Bf-109K4, could outperform B-17s in every performance metric. Speed, climb rate, and maneuverability all favored German designs significantly. Engineering excellence was evident in these advanced fighters. German cannons hit far harder than American .50 caliber machine guns. They delivered explosive shells that could destroy bombers with just a few well-placed hits. The 30mm Mk108 cannon was particularly devastating against bomber structures. Single hits could sever control cables or ignite fuel systems. Yet despite these advantages in equipment and pilot skill, German fighters couldn't stop the daylight bombing campaign that systematically destroyed German industrial capacity. Strategic failure occurred despite tactical successes by individual pilots and squadrons. The paradox troubled German commanders throughout 1944. Galland attributed this failure to multiple factors in his post-war writings and interviews. American industrial capacity topped his list of decisive elements. The Americans simply built more of everything faster than Germany could destroy it. This applied to bombers, fighters, tanks, and any other war material. The captured B-17s proved this reality beyond doubt for German engineers and planners who studied them intensively. Technical excellence meant nothing without matching production capabilities. Industrial organization determined strategic outcomes more than individual weapon characteristics or tactical innovations. German mechanics took apart every bolt and wire with obsessive precision. They stripped each system down to its core components. Every design choice faced intense scrutiny from trained engineers. They examined welding patterns on the fuselage. They tested metal thickness at stress points. They measured cable tensions in control systems. What they discovered impressed even skeptical observers. The fortress showed mature engineering principles throughout its construction. Manufacturing quality exceeded German expectations for mass-produced aircraft. The Americans had successfully integrated advanced technologies into a coherent fighting machine. Each component served multiple purposes with elegant efficiency. Material shortages plagued German production throughout the conflict. No tactical brilliance could overcome such fundamental disadvantages. Pilot skill meant nothing when ammunition ran low. Individual courage couldn't replace missing spare parts. The mathematics of industrial warfare had already determined outcomes before most battles began. Hans Werner Lescher accumulated flight time in captured aircraft across multiple test facilities. His logbook recorded over 125 different aircraft types from various nations: Soviet fighters, British bombers, American pursuit planes, French reconnaissance aircraft. Each flight provided new insights into enemy capabilities. Not one serious accident marred his extensive test flying career. No damaged aircraft, no injured pilots. Professional competence guided every evaluation mission. His post-war writings revealed complex emotions about Allied aviation technology, genuine respect mixed with professional frustration. Allied equipment impressed him with its quality and reliability. German industry's inability to match production rates troubled him deeply. Organizational efficiency among Allied forces surpassed German expectations. The disparity grew larger with each passing month. British Lancasters handled differently than American bombers. Soviet fighters showed unique design philosophies. Each aircraft taught specific lessons about national approaches to aviation. Engineering priorities varied dramatically between nations, but the B-17 remained uniquely significant among all captured types. It embodied American strategic bombing doctrine in physical form. Aluminum and steel transformed abstract military theory into operational reality. Every design element supported deep penetration missions into hostile territory. Wing loading optimized for high-altitude performance. Fuel capacity enabled 1,000-mile round trips. Bomb bay dimensions accommodated maximum ordnance loads. The Norden bomb site promised precision targeting from extreme altitudes. Defensive armament protected against fighter attacks during extended exposure over targets. Those machine guns that fascinated German evaluators served as the mission's critical enabler. Without defensive firepower, formation flying became impossible. Individual bombers would face slaughter from fighter attacks. Daylight operations would collapse under unsustainable losses. America would abandon precision bombing for nighttime area attacks like British forces. Strategic accuracy would decline dramatically without visual bombing conditions. The entire doctrine depended on defensive guns creating survivable formations. They didn't guarantee invulnerability against determined attacks. Thousands of B-17s fell to German fighters and anti-aircraft fire across Europe. Skilled Luftwaffe pilots shot down hundreds of bombers through courage and tactical innovation. But enough fortresses survived each mission to hit their assigned targets. Enough crews completed 25 mission tours to return home alive. Later, the tour requirement increased to 35 missions as loss rates improved. Experienced survivors trained replacement crews in combat techniques. Institutional knowledge accumulated systematically through organized rotation policies. Cumulative effects mounted over hundreds of bombing missions spanning 2 years. German industrial capacity crumbled under systematic attack. Oil production facilities burned across Romania and Germany. Transportation networks collapsed under sustained interdiction bombing. Military production capabilities declined as factories faced repeated destruction. Strategic bombing achieved its primary objectives by early 1945. German industry lay shattered across the Ruhr Valley and other centers. Fuel shortages grounded Luftwaffe aircraft despite having planes available. Transportation chaos prevented supply deliveries to frontline units. German armies faced defeat without adequate logistical support. The Fortress campaign succeeded, despite horrific losses along the way. Wolfhound met its end during an American bombing raid on Bernburg Airfield on April 10, 1945. The captured bomber that taught Luftwaffe pilots about American defensive tactics became a symbol of futile resistance. Fighting against overwhelming material advantage had proven impossible regardless of individual skill or determination. German pilots learned to attack B-17 formations using knowledge gained from captured examples. They identified blind spots in defensive coverage where guns couldn't reach. They developed tactics to exploit vulnerable systems and crew positions. They practiced coordinated attacks that maximized chances for success against determined opposition. But tactical excellence became increasingly irrelevant as bomber streams grew larger. American formations included 1,000 aircraft escorted by equal numbers of long-range fighters. Individual skill couldn't compensate for such numerical superiority. Industrial disparity determined outcomes more than pilot training or combat experience. Captured B-17s in German service represent curious footnotes to the larger strategic bombing narrative. These machines, built in American factories by American workers, had flown combat missions with American crews. German forces shot them down or forced emergency landings through skill and luck. German technicians rebuilt them for Luftwaffe service. German pilots flew them on evaluation missions and special operations. They served as unique windows into Allied capabilities and American industrial methods. They revealed strengths that required new German tactics to counter effectively. They exposed weaknesses that skilled pilots could exploit under favorable conditions. They trained fighter pilots in aircraft recognition procedures that saved German lives during combat. They supported covert missions deep behind enemy lines that achieved tactical objectives. KG-200 used several captured B-17s for infiltration operations throughout 1943 and 1944. They contributed meaningfully to German war efforts in multiple ways during their service period. Yet they also demonstrated the impossibility of Germany's strategic position through their very existence. Every captured bomber revealed the scale of American industrial capacity. Thousands more rolled off production lines, while Germans studied individual examples. The replacement rate exceeded loss rates by substantial margins throughout the campaign. German technicians spent countless hours repairing captured American aircraft. This skilled labor was diverted from maintaining German aircraft that desperately needed attention. Every gallon of precious fuel burned during evaluation flights represented fuel unavailable for combat operations. Every bullet fired during training exercises was ammunition Germany couldn't afford to waste. Meanwhile, American factories produced replacement B-17s every single day. Production rates accelerated as manufacturers refined assembly techniques and worker training. Combat losses were replaced faster than German forces could inflict them. The industrial mathematics favored America by overwhelming margins. Production statistics remained staggering 8 decades after the war ended. Boeing's Seattle plants alone built 6981 B-17s across all variants. The production line started with the original Y-1 B-17 prototype. It ended with the final B-17G model featuring maximum defensive armament. Douglas contributed 3,000 aircraft from Long Beach facilities between 1942 and 1945. Assembly lines operated around the clock, with multiple shifts. Vega added 27 and 50 bombers from Burbank plants during the same time frame. Total production exceeded 20,031 aircraft by war's end in May 1945. The final B-17 rolled off production lines as Germany surrendered unconditionally. Each bomber represented a complex machine containing approximately 4,000 individual parts, manufactured by hundreds of subcontractors across America. 4 Wright Cyclone R-1820 engines producing 1,200 horsepower each powered every fortress. Miles of electrical wiring connected systems throughout the aircraft. Thousands of pounds of aluminum were formed into airframe structures using advanced manufacturing techniques. The formidable defensive armament included up to 13 heavy machine guns with thousands of rounds of ammunition stored throughout the aircraft. Germany never built even 200 four-engine bombers during the entire war. This despite starting with a more advanced aviation industry in the 1930s. German engineers had pioneered strategic bombing concepts before the war began. Yet production capabilities never matched theoretical knowledge or tactical requirements. Multiple factors explain this dramatic production disparity beyond simple industrial capacity. American strategic doctrine prioritized heavy bombers for deep penetration missions against strategic targets. Germany focused on medium bombers, and dive bombers optimized for close air support of ground forces advancing rapidly through enemy territory. These represented fundamentally different military philosophies, reflecting different strategic situations. American geography protected by vast oceans allowed undisturbed factory expansion and continuous operation. Enemy forces couldn't reach American industrial centers to disrupt production through bombing or sabotage. German industry operated under constant Allied bombing that destroyed facilities systematically. Skilled workers died in air raids or were drafted for military service. Supply chains faced repeated disruption as transportation networks crumbled under sustained attack. Raw materials became increasingly difficult to obtain as imports ceased and domestic sources faced bombardment. American engineering education produced thousands of skilled designers annually. Technical schools graduated managers and production specialists in steady streams. University programs expanded rapidly to meet wartime demands for technical personnel. Germany struggled with manpower shortages as casualties mounted and skilled workers faced conscription for military service. American political and economic systems proved more adaptable to total war mobilization. Democratic institutions facilitated rapid decision-making when consensus emerged around national priorities. Market mechanisms efficiently allocated resources to priority production. The Nazi hierarchy created competing power centers with inefficient decision-making processes and ideological constraints that hampered rational resource allocation. These factors combined to create overwhelming industrial advantages that determined strategic outcomes. The B-17 Flying Fortress represented just one weapon in America's vast arsenal, but it symbolized the entire apparatus of American war production operating at maximum capacity and coordination. Luftwaffe officers stood before Wolfhound at Rechlin, studying its construction with professional interest. They tested its systems methodically. They flew evaluation missions to understand its capabilities. But they were really studying American industrial civilization and its capacity for sustained production under wartime conditions. What they learned should have been obvious to anyone studying American industrial capacity objectively. You cannot defeat enemies who build bombers faster than you can shoot them down. You cannot win when enemies train crews faster than you can kill them. You cannot succeed when enemies deliver more bombs than your entire nation produces across all industrial sectors. The defensive firepower that impressed German test pilots was merely the visible manifestation of deeper American advantages. Industrial organization surpassed German capabilities by substantial margins. Resource allocation proceeded more efficiently through market mechanisms. Economic mobilization achieved higher percentages of total capacity devoted to war production. The real secret weapon wasn't 13 machine guns mounted on B-17G aircraft. It was the economic and industrial system that designed, manufactured, and deployed 2731 of these bombers simultaneously with 300,000 aircraft of all types. The same system built 88,000 tanks and 41 billion rounds of ammunition while fighting global war on multiple fronts across several continents and 2 major oceans. No amount of tactical brilliance could overcome such overwhelming disparity in industrial output. No level of pilot skill could compensate for numerical inferiority approaching 10-to-1 ratios. No degree of individual courage could change strategic mathematics that predicted defeat with mathematical certainty. Hans Werner Lescher flew dozens of captured Allied aircraft throughout the war. He saw firsthand the quality and quantity of enemy equipment reaching combat units. His professional assessment concluded that Germany had already lost the war by 1943 based purely on industrial mathematics and production capacity comparisons. The mathematics of material production predicted defeat with absolute certainty. Only questions remaining concerned timing of the final collapse. How much additional destruction would occur before surrender became inevitable? The captured B-17 at Rechlin answered important tactical questions for German fighter pilots who studied it intensively. Evaluations revealed blind spots in defensive coverage that skilled pilots could exploit. They identified vulnerable systems, including hydraulics and oxygen equipment, that could disable bombers with precise attacks. They demonstrated attack profiles offering the best chances of success for determined pilots willing to press attacks home against heavy defensive fire. But captured aircraft couldn't answer fundamental strategic questions that determined final outcomes. How do you stop 1,000 bombers when you can barely build 1,000 fighters annually? How do you defend cities against endless raids when pilots fly 3 or 4 missions per day until killed, wounded, or exhausted beyond safe flying capability? How do you maintain industrial production when every factory worker knows American bombs will eventually find their workplace? How do you preserve civilian morale when air raid sirens sound multiple times daily and destruction mounts systematically across all major cities? These questions had no satisfactory answers within Nazi Germany's war strategy and industrial organization framework. The regime had started a war assuming quick victory before enemies could fully mobilize their economies. When that fundamental assumption proved false, when war became grinding contests of industrial attrition, Germany's fate was sealed by decisions made during the 1930s. The B-17 Flying Fortress, with its multiple heavy machine guns throwing 1,600 rounds per minute into surrounding airspace, represented more than tactical challenges. Its ability to absorb horrific damage and continue flying toward targets demonstrated American engineering excellence. Its clear manifestation of American industrial capability delivered strategic verdicts on the war's ultimate outcome. The bombers came every day in increasing numbers throughout 1944 and 1945. Fighter escorts grew more numerous and capable with each passing month. Targets burned systematically across German industrial centers. Nothing the Luftwaffe could do would stop the campaign despite heroic individual efforts by skilled pilots. Luftwaffe test pilots at Rechlin flew captured B-17s extensively throughout their evaluation programs. They came away with grudging respect for American engineering capabilities. They admired manufacturing quality that exceeded expectations for mass-produced aircraft. They appreciated thoughtful design, prioritizing crew survivability and operational effectiveness under combat conditions. They acknowledged devastating defensive firepower that made attacking formations deadly propositions even for experienced pilots. Multiple machine guns created interlocking fields of fire, covering all approach angles. Heavy-caliber weapons could destroy fighters at ranges exceeding normal combat distances. Volume of ammunition allowed sustained engagements during extended bomber stream passages. But professional respect for enemy weapons did nothing to change battle outcomes in skies over Europe. Knowledge of enemy capabilities couldn't create resources needed to defeat them when those resources didn't exist in sufficient quantities. By late 1944, many captured B-17s in German service had been destroyed or rendered unflyable through various causes beyond combat action. Allied bombing raids on German airfields targeted Luftwaffe infrastructure systematically. Captured aircraft faced destruction alongside German planes during these attacks. Maintenance issues grounded others as spare parts became impossible to obtain with supply chains disrupted. American components couldn't be manufactured in German factories under wartime conditions. A few continued flying special missions for KG-200 until the final weeks of war in early 1945. But their intelligence value had been largely exhausted by this point in the conflict. The Luftwaffe knew everything worth knowing about flying fortress capabilities through years of intensive study and combat experience. They understood blind spots where defensive guns couldn't reach attacking fighters. They knew vulnerabilities in specific systems that could be exploited. They had developed tactics to attack formations effectively when conditions permitted and fuel supplies allowed operations. Yet this hard-won knowledge proved increasingly useless against thousand bomber raids escorted by hundreds of fighters. Individual German pilots continued achieving remarkable success against B-17 formations throughout the war. Some aces shot down dozens of bombers using perfected attack techniques learned partly from studying captured examples. But heroic individual performance couldn't compensate for systematic industrial inferiority and numerical disadvantages that grew worse monthly. For every ace surviving long enough to develop expertise through dozens of missions, 10 novice pilots died on their first or second combat sorties before learning effective tactics. Average life expectancy for German day fighter pilots by 1944 measured in weeks rather than months of active service. Many never achieved 10 combat missions before being killed or wounded too badly to continue flying duties. This created downward spirals of declining experience levels, as veteran pilots were killed faster than replacements could be trained to competent standards. Americans implemented systematic crew rotation policies, sending air crews home after completing tour requirements. 25 missions initially, later increased to 35 missions as loss rates declined through improved tactics and fighter escort availability. Survivors returned to training commands in the United States, where they passed hard-won combat experience to new crews preparing for overseas deployment. This systematic approach to crew utilization contrasted sharply with German practice of flying pilots until they died, were captured, or became physically unable to continue due to wounds or complete exhaustion. Different philosophies reflected different industrial realities and strategic positions in the global conflict. America could afford rotating experienced crews to training roles because production provided steady streams of replacement aircraft and newly trained crews fresh from flight schools. Germany couldn't spare anyone with combat experience from active duty assignments. Every pilot capable of flying combat missions stayed on the line until killed, captured, or incapacitated, leading to declining average experience levels across all fighter units. Captured B-17s taught the Luftwaffe much about American defensive firepower through systematic study and evaluation programs. Fighting against thousand bomber raids taught harder lessons about American resolve, industrial resources, and strategic staying power under extended wartime conditions. The ultimate lesson came in May 1945, when guns finally fell silent across Europe after 6 years of devastating warfare. Germany lay in complete ruins, with cities destroyed and industry shattered beyond immediate repair capability. Its military was crushed between Soviet forces advancing from the east and Western Allied armies pushing from the west into the German heartland. The bombers had completed their mission over 2 years of sustained operations, despite taking terrible losses along the way. Nearly 5,000 B-17s were lost to all causes during the war, including combat action, operational accidents, and weather-related incidents. The defensive firepower that impressed German test pilots in 1943 had proved sufficient for fortresses to complete their strategic mission objectives. The story ends in European skies, where men fought and died in machines representing their nation's industrial capabilities, strategic doctrines, and fundamental approaches to modern warfare. Hans Werner Lescher survived the war and lived until 1991, long enough to publish memoirs and participate in historical projects, documenting Luftwaffe test pilot experiences. He remained proud of his service and technical accomplishments while acknowledging the futility of Germany's cause and inevitability of defeat once American industrial capacity achieved full mobilization. His expertise flying captured Allied aircraft made him valuable to Allied intelligence services after the war ended. He contributed to several projects evaluating German and captured Allied aircraft for post-war air forces developing new capabilities. Wolfhound served Germany from December 1942 until its destruction in April 1945. During those 2.5 years, it taught German aviators and engineers volumes about American bomber design, defensive tactics, and industrial capabilities underlying strategic bombing campaigns. The lessons proved intellectually valuable, but strategically irrelevant to changing final outcomes. Understanding enemy advantages doesn't eliminate them or create effective counters when necessary resources simply don't exist in adequate quantities. The 13 machine guns that impressed test pilots at Rechlin represented American industrial philosophy made tangible in metal components. Overwhelming firepower through volume of fire, mutual support through formation tactics and coordinated defensive procedures. Redundancy through multiple weapon systems covering all possible approach angles, all designed to ensure sufficient bombers survived each mission to destroy assigned targets and return home to fly again the following day. This philosophy worked despite heavy costs and substantial losses throughout the campaign, despite losing nearly 5,000 B-17s to all causes, despite casualty rates among bomber crews exceeding 20% in some units during 1943. Despite determined German fighter opposition that shot down hundreds of fortresses through skilled resistance, the strategic bombing campaign succeeded in achieving its primary objectives. Germany's war industries were systematically destroyed across the Ruhr and other major industrial centers. Cities burned from repeated incendiary attacks, targeting civilian areas and worker housing. Transportation networks collapsed under sustained interdiction bombing of bridges, rail yards, and canal systems. When the war ended, American factories were still building B-17s at rates allowing complete replacement of all combat losses within 6 months, demonstrating ultimate futility of winning attrition wars against American industrial capacity operating at full mobilization. Captured B-17s in German service became unwitting witnesses to their own nation's inevitable defeat. Every test flight revealed additional American capabilities and advantages. Every evaluation report documented American industrial and technological superiority in multiple areas. Every training exercise emphasized the same inescapable strategic message. America possessed industrial capacity that Germany could never match through any realistic means available under wartime conditions. The defensive firepower was impressive and merited professional respect from experienced pilots. The productive capacity behind it was overwhelming and ultimately decisive in determining strategic outcomes. That was the real lesson of captured flying fortresses, though it took considerable time for all participants to fully comprehend the broader implications. Luftwaffe officers who flew captured B-17s admitted they had never encountered defensive firepower comparable to fortress armament in their experience with other bomber types from various nations. They marveled at interlocking fields of fire covering all approach angles simultaneously. Heavy-caliber weapons could destroy fighters at long ranges. Volume of ammunition allowed sustained engagements against multiple attackers. But defensive guns were merely visible manifestations of America's true strategic weapon. the arsenal of democracy operating at full capacity and unprecedented coordination across all industrial sectors. That arsenal, once fully unleashed and completely mobilized for total war, proved unstoppable despite determined resistance and heroic individual efforts. The fortresses came in their hundreds every day. Bombs fell systematically on assigned targets. Germany fell with them into complete defeat and occupation. Captured B-17s could teach valuable tactics and reveal exploitable vulnerabilities to skilled pilots. They couldn't change strategic destiny determined by industrial capacity and productive capability operating under democratic institutions committed to total victory.